All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into what is, honestly, one of the most profound turning points in all of human history, the scientific revolution. Now, forget those dry textbook dates for a second. This is actually the ultimate underdog story. We're talking about a handful of completely rogue thinkers who, armed with really nothing but curiosity and some pretty primitive tools, completely disrupted our entire understanding of the universe. I mean, they directly challenged the absolute greatest authorities of their day, and in doing so, they literally laid the foundation for the modern world we're living in right now.
Okay, let's step back for a minute. I want you to put yourself right in the shoes of someone living in Europe during the Middle Ages. You have absolutely zero modern technology. No telescopes, no smartphones, definitely no internet. If you wanted to explain the natural world, or the changing of the seasons, or even just the movement of the stars, how would you actually do it? Well, you'd have to rely entirely on what you could see with your own two eyes, right? And back then, that personal observation was combined with two unquestionable authorities: the ancient texts of Greek and Roman philosophers like Aristotle and the teachings of the Bible. For centuries, practically nobody ever thought to question those sources.
So this total lack of technology led early astronomers to develop what we call the Ptolemaic system. And, it was highly intricate, it was incredibly detailed, but unfortunately for them, ultimately completely wrong. They looked up at the sky, saw the sun and stars moving across it, and just drew the most logical conclusion available to them at the time. The Earth was standing perfectly still, and everything else was just moving around us in these complex, perfectly circular spheres.
Section 1. Setting the stage. The geocentric status quo.
To truly appreciate how wild this revolution was, we have to understand the absolute rules of the old world. Because these weren't just passing scientific theories. These were firmly established, unshakable rules of existence, and questioning them was totally taboo. This accepted view was called the geocentric theory. Geo meaning Earth, and centric meaning center. It held that the Earth was the unmoving center of the universe. But here's the thing, this wasn't just a matter of primitive astronomy. It was a matter of deep, deep religious conviction. The Catholic Church heavily supported this view because it perfectly aligned with their teaching that God had deliberately placed Earth at the center of the universe, because humanity was the central focus of God's creation. So to challenge the geocentric theory was essentially to challenge the Church itself.
Section 2. Catalysts for a revolution. The sparks of change. So how exactly do you break a status quo that's been locked in place for over 1,000 years? Well, moving into the 16th and 17th centuries, several massive cultural shifts basically ignited a challenge to this age-old dogma. We had the Renaissance, which really encouraged this new spirit of inquiry, and the Age of Exploration, which suddenly required much better navigational instruments. But here's the real kicker. Imagine sailing to a totally new continent and seeing, say, an armadillo for the very first time, when your ancient Greek textbooks said absolutely nothing about it. Literally nothing. It made people start to realize, hey, if the ancients missed entirely new continents and creatures, what else were they wrong about? And crucially, thanks to the printing press, these highly disruptive new questions were able to spread across Europe faster than ever before.
Section 3. The Astronomy Rebels. Moving the Earth.
Now, the revolution didn't kick off with biology or chemistry. It actually started with a few bold scientists who simply looked up at the sky. And the contrast here is pretty striking. On one side, you had the old, church-approved geocentric model with Earth firmly planted right in the middle. But in the early 1500s, a Polish astronomer named Nicholas Copernicus proposes a completely revolutionary idea, a sun-centered heliocentric theory. He theorized that the Earth, just like all the other planets, actually revolved around the sun.
But here's the human side of the story. Copernicus knew exactly how dangerous his ideas were. He knew for a fact they directly contradicted both accepted academic thinking and strict religious doctrine. Because he feared severe ridicule and outright persecution from the Catholic Church, he actually refused to publish his findings for decades. He literally waited until he was on his deathbed in 1543 to finally release his groundbreaking book on the revolutions of the heavenly bodies.
So Copernicus started the fire, but his model actually had a bit of a flaw. It still relied on perfectly circular orbits. Enter a brilliant mathematician named Johannes Kepler. He comes along, crunches the numbers, and realizes, wait a minute, planets actually travel in ellipses or ovals. His first law of planetary motion is what finally made the math match the actual reality of the sky.
Right around this exact same time, an Italian scientist you might have heard of, Galileo Galilei, decides to build one of the very first telescopes to study the planets. And what he saw through that lens completely shattered the ancient view of the cosmos. He discovered Jupiter had its own moons, which meant, hey, not everything orbits the Earth. And when he looked at our moon, he saw that it was covered in craters and mountains. It wasn't some perfect, divine, heavenly orb. It was a giant, rough rock, just like Earth.
Now, Galileo's ideas spread like wildfire, and this is where the conflict really reaches a boiling point. The Catholic Church ordered Galileo to completely abandon his ideas, and they actually forced him to publicly take back his scientific statements under threat of torture. But why? Think about it. Why was the absolute most powerful institution on Earth so deeply terrified by a guy looking through a glass tube at the moon?
Well, because this wasn't just about the physical texture of the moon. The stakes were so much higher. If Earth wasn't the center, well, then humanity wasn't the center. Furthermore, the old model placed heaven and God in a very specific physical location just outside the spheres of the stars. The heliocentric model blew that concept wide open. It suggested this vast, perhaps infinite universe where God was no longer in one specific, easily pointable place. It challenged the Church's absolute authority over reality itself, which is exactly why they desperately tried to silence it.
Section 4. Rewriting the Rulebook, the Scientific Method.
But honestly, the genie was already out of the bottle. If the ancients were completely wrong about the fundamental structure of the universe, scientists realized they needed a totally new system to find the truth. Up until this point, people just relied on tradition. Now, they demanded proof. Two major thinkers really championed this new approach. You had the English writer Francis Bacon, who argued that scientists must rely on what they can physically observe and test through experimentation, and meanwhile, the French mathematician René Descartes believed literally everything should be doubted until it could be proven by logic and mathematics.
And this essentially gave humanity a brand new playbook. Instead of just blindly accepting tradition, you ask a question, you form a hypothesis, you test it rigorously, and you let the data decide the outcome. It completely shifted human thought from blind trust to demanded proof. A real game changer.
Section 5. Newton's Grand Unification, the World Machine.
Now, all of these amazing new tools and observations needed one brilliantly unique mind to kind of tie them all together. Enter the English scientist Isaac Newton in the mid-1600s. Newton described the universal law of gravitation. He mathematically proved that every single object in the universe attracts every other object, depending on its mass and distance. So for the first time in history, Newton proved that the exact same physical force that causes an apple to fall to the ground right here on Earth is the exact same force that holds the planets in their elliptical orbits around the sun. Mind-blowing, right?
This fundamentally shifted humanity's entire worldview, creating what became known as the world machine concept. The universe wasn't being driven by mysterious, unpredictable spirits anymore. It was basically a giant, intricate piece of clockwork. It was a machine that operated according to strict natural laws, and if you just had the right mathematics, every single motion throughout the entire universe could be perfectly explained and predicted.
Section 6. A world radically transformed. Beyond astronomy.
This completely new experimental mindset didn't just stay in astronomy. It sparked a cascade of breakthroughs far beyond physics. I mean, we invented microscopes to see the previously invisible world around us. Doctors finally abandoned ancient assumptions and literally mapped out how the human heart actually pumps blood. Edward Jenner even used careful observation of cowpox to invent the first ever vaccine, successfully preventing the incredibly deadly human disease of smallpox. Science was now out there actively saving lives.
So the scientific revolution wasn't just some dusty period in history. It was literally a fundamental rewiring of how human beings process reality. These rogue thinkers taught us that observation, experimentation, and a true willingness to question authority are the absolute engines of progress. They challenged the ultimate unquestionable dogmas of their day, and they proved them wrong. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. As you look around at our society today, what firmly accepted truths of our modern world is science just waiting to overturn next? Keep questioning, keep observing, and thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer.